Hello, everyone out there. Welcome to the Abby Normals podcast. This is Mark, who is one of the regular hosts for the show. If you're wondering where everyone else is, well, they were abducted by aliens and they won't be seen again. I'm kidding. The Abby Normals, we are a podcast, but we are also regular people. And with regular people, we have regular lives, and Alex and Ro's lives are kind of hitting them hard this month, for the better. Alex is currently working, and Ro is moving to a better place, and it's going to take her a little bit of time. It's quite a bit of distance away, so she's going to be gone for the first half of this month. This leads us to a very interesting conundrum. As much as everybody loves to hear me talk about pretty much anything, which I don't know if that's true or not, but that's just my guess. We decided to add another co-host to the show. After a lengthy process and a lot of interviews, we have decided to get Dan as a part of the Abby Normals. Dan is with me right now. How are you, Dan?
I'm doing wonderful. Thank you, Mark, for having me and inviting me to the Abby Normals.
Yeah, no. We're excited. And since Dan is a fellow Chicago boy like I am, well, first and foremost, Dan is a Chicago boy, just like me. Unfortunately, he is a Sox fan, so that's the...
It's the only... I mean, first place, as of right now and recording, first place. The first place Chicago White Sox.
See, that's strike two. No. We're very happy to have Dan on the show. And since he is from Chicago like I am, Dan and I kind of wanted to do a special episode just about ghosts of Chicago.
Absolutely. Being born on the southwest side of Chicago, there's two definitely very familiar, I think, ghost stories or haunted places, whatever you want to call it, that we'll be talking about in this episode. And ironically, I've always wanted to cover one of these, just because I've always been kind of fascinated with one of them. The other one I think is pretty cool, but the one I think everybody's probably going to know about, I think, is always just phenomenal, and I love talking about it.
Well, the fantastic thing about both of these two is that I know I'm talking about more northern suburb ghost stories, which are still pretty well known. I think two of the locations are, one is less known, like yours, but the other one is regarded as one of the most haunted places in the country too, just like your other location that you're going to be discussing. And both of these places are typically featured on ghost shows or like ghost history shows because of the dark history behind them. Exactly.
So I mean, do we want to kind of just get into the first one of what?
Yeah.
And just kind of hit it hard.
Let's knock it out of the park.
Okay, so the first one that we're going to talk about, and where I grew up in Chicago, if you would draw if you take where the city of Chicago is, or like you look on a map or whatever, and there's that dot. If you draw a line, basically almost directly southwest from there, you keep going, you're going to hit like these suburbs, and that's basically where I grew up. So this one's actually very, very close to where I grew up, and that's Bachelor's Grove. So Bachelor's Grove is a cemetery that's on the southwest side of Chicago, like I said, and it's basically between Oak Forest and Alsip, which, I mean, that's really about how famous those cities are, is that's we're mentioning them. There's not really a lot that goes on there, but what Bachelor's Grove basically is, there's kind of a conundrum or a conflicting argument of how it actually got its name. So, according to the Tinley Park Historical Society, so Tinley Park is, if you keep going a little bit more south, it's another suburb. It's actually a very, very big suburb. So they're saying that the first claim is that there was a family known as the Bachelor Endels. I'm really not sure how to say their last name. It's
Something German.
Batch Elder. Yeah, it's like Batch Elderlands family. They supposedly were in that township around 1845, and that's where they. I think more the historical society is saying where it actually came from, of why it's called Bachelor's Grove, basically after their last name. But and the funny thing is that there's kind of two different spellings of this. So like when you think Bachelor's Grove and you think Bachelor, how do you spell Bachelor? Bachelors.
Yeah, this could be embarrassing for me because I'm not that great of a speller, but I'm just going to assume that you're spelling it correctly right there.
So yeah, so like when you get a bachelor's degree, that's how you spell it. Bachelors. Okay. Well, Bachelor's Grove officially is Batchelors. So it's not bachelor, but bachelor.
But here's the thing, though, too. It could be also somebody like me who just can't spell. And if this was laid out by some guy way back in the day, he could have added that, he could have just been phonetically spelling it out and been like, oh yeah, no, there's a Batchler. He could have messed up the spelling because the cemetery is old as hell.
Correct. So that's where a lot of like the Tinley Park Historical Society is basically saying it's probably named after this family because of how it's spelled and how their last name was spelled. But according to a claim in 1833 or 1834, it was claimed that an actual settler there, his name is Stephen H. Rexford, he per se settled at what they call the Grove. So not necessarily Bachelor's Grove, but what that found is that it was him and a group of 4 other single men that settled there, thus becoming Bachelor's Grove. So because they never married, so they stay bachelors for their whole life and basically are buried there too. So there's kind of speculation of how it actually is the origin of it, which, I really think that if you start to dive into like what people think are haunted here and things that go on, I think conflicting is the best way, or even to a point of a like conundrum of what actually people see and hear or whatever have claimed is at Bachelor's Grove.
Well, for me personally, because also I'm apologizing that I sound, if I'm breathing heavy, it's allergy season, and this time of year just kills me, and I sound like James Gandolfini from The Sopranos whenever I breathe during this time. So apologizing for that in advance, but the thing is that when you were describing the two stories, the first time I ever heard about Bachelor's Grove Cemetery is because it was called Bachelor's Grove because so many young men from the, Eastern European, Central European region were coming to Chicago because the environment within itself is very similar to that region of Europe. However, they weren't anticipating like the lake effect, and they weren't anticipating how cold it got during that time of year. And a lot of them died. And the cemetery was kind of built to store the remains of these, young men who died, who were bachelors. And they had come over and they had died, and it was kind of a sad event. So they kind of memorialized them by building Bachelor's Grove Cemetery. And the confliction within that is where I think I don't know where to go with it, because every story I hear about like ghost stories, especially from our area, because everything you hear is just one person's story, another person says something. You start talking about these haunted places, and then out of nowhere, someone's like, oh, I know that place. I went there. I saw this, this, or this, and I saw this, this, or this. And then someone's like, no, no, no. And the stories start getting conflicted. And next thing you know, you have 40 stories about the same place. And when I hear like either there's the Bachelor's Grove with the one guy who died versus the Tinley Park's actual historical record, I want to believe Tinley Park's historical record. It's not as cool though as the guys who died, as morbid as that is to say. It doesn't really set a good like mythos and a good origin story for why the place is haunted.
Yeah, I agree. So that's where I was kind of getting with the name. According to historical societies, um, like official stance on it, it's actually named after the family, not after Rexford.
Okay.
So just kind of interesting on that. But um, you're right, and we'll get into the part that you were talking about. But I think I know that there's two like per se things that people always kind of go back to when it comes to these two, and I think one is more prevalent than the other one. But I've always heard these two things, and that's the story of the Madonna of Bachelor's Grove, or the White Lady of Bachelor's Grove, who, according to
Yeah.
legend, is buried next to her child. Who sometimes you can see her. People say there's apparitions of her holding the baby in her arms. It's kind of interesting that it's happened so much, and people claim this one so much that I mean, I know me as a child, as a kid, as a teenager, who we were, hey, we're gonna be brave and go on there, around Halloween and try to go. I
Yeah.
know that because of this story, that you can't go into it at night. Like, there's police will actually arrest you for going to Bachelor's Grove at night, and they actually block off Bachelor's Grove around Halloween just because of that. Like,
Yeah. Well, they'd
so
have to because it's such a well-known haunt that, I mean, there's the place by us. The police have like monitored. They put cameras up, and around Halloween they get real stupid about it too because they're like, you can't even
yeah,
go down the road at certain
yeah.
times of night. They don't want to like have anybody just out there doing all this crap. But it also, like, I guess in a lot of ways, you're destroying the cemetery if you're tromping around there at night. Who knows what you're kicking over?
Well, that's true, and obviously, I mean, it's kind of like it's off. It's kind of off the beaten path too. Like, you really can't. Like, this is
Yeah,
not
it's in the
something that
middle
you're
of
gonna go
nowhere.
drive down the street and say, "Oh, look, there's Bachelor's Grove. I see it." Like, you gotta kind of go around a bit and all of that.
If I
There,
if I
there.
remember correctly from the time I went there, I mean, you had to go down this like dirt road. You basically
Yep,
parked out. I forgot what road you parked out on a road, and then you had to walk down this long dirt road in the
yep,
middle of the woods.
yep, yep. That's exactly what it is. Um, so you have that. There's actually a grave there that says actually infant daughter on there, which is kind of freaky. Like, it's um,
Terrible.
yeah, yeah, a little bit. And they're saying that the all the way up to 2011, people have still say that they have seen, basically this one started right around the 1980s, maybe a little bit before that, and still to up to 2011. I have not seen anything. I was not able to find anything earlier, or closer to our date, closer to present date, for
Yeah.
that. Another thing where the people have saying they've seen it in 2011 is the phantom dog. Once again, this started around the 1980s, and this is basically the way that legend goes with this is uh, it can be traced back as far as the 1980s. The first sighting is said to have occurred while two young men were visiting the cemetery. As one of them was walking around inside, he witnessed strange flickering lights within the flora. According to the witness, he could not find an explanation for the lights, and that there was no object in the area that could have caused a reflection of some sort. Upon turning around, he then witnessed the backside of a dog, and it faded away into what was being described as nothingness. This is from patch.com. What I was reading an excerpt from that. So patch.com, Bachelor's Grove, desecrated cemetery haunts seem to still be alive and well. But like I said, I just there's so many things that happen with that. I know that this brings up two things. One, I know that people have said that there's lights, but then there's also this phantom dog that goes there. Now, growing up, I was always told this about Bachelor's Grove, but I've yet to find anything else there. And that was supposedly a place that mafia people would take guys to execute them and bury them.
See, I heard the same thing, and I remember I don't remember what the special was, but I remember it was on like Discovery Channel or it was on like History Channel, and it was around Halloween, and they were talking about like the most haunted places in America, and one of them was Bachelor's Grove Cemetery, and this woman, I forgot her name, and started like reviving the cemetery like in the 80s or the 90s because it was in such disrepair. Like they said, you could walk through there in like the 80s and there'd just be a skeleton hand sticking up out of the ground. Like it was god awful at this place. And she started restoring the cemetery, and they're saying like after she restored it and has been taking care of it, like a lot of the ghosts have calmed down, and that's why you're not seeing so many sightings anymore. But one of the things she was saying is that they started like trying to repatriate the graves and put the cemetery back in order, and they were finding skeleton on skeleton on skeleton, and they were saying it was like either they just started burying people on top of each other, or a lot of them had bullet holes. Is that the mob was taking people out to Bachelor's Grove, shooting them, and then reburying them out in the cemetery so nobody would start looking for them.
Yeah, I mean that's basically what I've heard is that people would just go out there because you would never think to look there, or people would want to go out there. I know that if you do go out there are a lot of graves that are desecrated. There's graffiti on them and all of that. I know that, and I don't want to get into like any type of religious thing because I don't know, but supposedly people would sacrifice animals out there and all of that. So there's definitely a draw to this place. And, like I said, there's just so many just different conflicting things of why, so I mean, is it the unrest of this white lady and Madonna? Is it the unrest of per se the bachelors that are there? Is it the unrest of the family that was there? Or, even to the point of if it's true with the mobsters, is it people's, is it the ghost of mobsters coming back? All I know is that the earliest or the most recent was in 2011, which right now is 11 years ago, but still.
I heard about the dog too. The three things I've always heard about Bachelor's Grove was the woman with the baby, but it was always some insidious thing. It was like this woman like killed this baby and then she killed herself and they buried themselves out there, or they buried her out. Not that they couldn't bury themselves, but they buried her out there in the woods with the cemetery. The dog that's like evil, and if you see the dog, you're gonna die in 7 days, just like The Ring. Only it's a video. It's a dog and not a videotape. The third was the old caretaker of the cemetery from like the 1800s who had a house, and the house will appear in the woods, and if you go in there, he like comes after you, and if you stay in the house when the sun rises, you just disappear with the house.
Yeah, I heard that one too, and I didn't necessarily mention that one because once again, that's kind of like the whole mobster thing. Like I've heard it, but I've never actually like really read it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, but I think it's important to note these things, like, because a lot of the stuff I've heard about the places I'll discuss, and then it's all stuff you hear, and those start somewhere. Like somebody had to be out there, and it's like I saw a house.
Yeah,
there was a guy.
Yep. Well, I mean, and anyone turn to him and be like, "Well, didn't your mother tell you when you were growing up, not to go into strange houses with men?"
Oh no. But he offered me candy, I swear. It was totally free.
So when it comes to Bachelor's Grove, I just know that, with Halloween coming up, once again, this legend always pops up. There's always kids that try to get out there. I'll tell you right now, if you are on the south side of Chicago and you're passing through between these times, don't stop and try to look for it. Because there's cops that are always around there, and they're going to be like, "What are you doing out here?" Because, once again, Chicago cops, I'm not going to say anything bad about them, but they never feel that anybody's going out there to do good out there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you're not out there to restore the graves at 2:00 in the morning.
Mm-hmm. But, so Mark.
Yes.
Okay. So I got to tell you, I got to ask you a question, and this is going to get into the other haunting place, the other thing that we're going to talk about from Chicago that I think most people are really, really going to know. And so let's say you are a cab driver. Okay.
Okay.
and you're driving along and you see a woman on the street, I would say 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, and she's wearing all white, would you stop and see if she needed a ride?
All right, there's two answers to this. One, the good Samaritan in me would be like, I hope she's okay. I should probably pull over and check to see if she's fine.
Mm-hmm.
The realist in me, if she's all wearing all white at 2 a.m. out in the middle of nowhere in the middle of the woods walking down the street, I'm going to assume she's like some vampire woman. And if I pull over, she's going to like seduce me with her mind, drag me out of the car, rip my throat out, and then just leave me in the woods. And then, 3 to 7 days later, I wake up and look like a blue vampire with crazy teeth. And I'm like Salem's Lot.
Hey, what a way to go, my friend.
I don't think that's a good way to go, though. Like, if it's not like sexy vampire. Like, if it's sexy vampire, I could deal with sexy vampire. But if it's like monstrous, like she looks good from like a minute, and then she like pulls me out of the car. She's got like yellow like eyes. Her jaw distends. I don't want that kind of. I want like Twilight vampires. I want to sparkle in the sun. I want to look like a teenage heartthrob. Be really disturbing in my emotional stalking of like a high school girl when I'm like 125 years old, and everything's okay because I can look sullen and sexy all at the same time. And drive a Volvo.
So let me read you this story. And this is why I asked this question. So on January 31st, 1979, an article in the Suburban Trib columnist Jim Geist detailed a story of a cab driver named Ralph. Ralph picked up a young woman, a looker, as he said, a blonde. She was young enough to be my daughter, 21 tops, near a small shopping center on Archer Avenue. A couple miles up Archer there, she jumped with a start like a horse and said, Here. I hit the brakes. I looked around and didn't see no kind of the house. This is Ralph's words. Where? I said, and then she sticks her arm out and points across the road to my left. There. And it just so happened, I looked to my left like this at this little shack. And as I turned around, gone, vanished. A car door never opened. May the good Lord strike me dead. It never opened. Where she basically was pointing was at Resurrection Cemetery. And supposedly... Yep. So supposedly this is the thing that has happened to numerous cab drivers, very similar in story. And they say that you have been visited by Resurrection Mary. No, Resurrection Mary, since the 1930s, this is an old legend, okay? That since 1930s is that men driving northeast along Archer Avenue between Willowbrook Ballroom and Resurrection Cemetery have reported picking up a young female hitchhiker. This woman would be dressed in somewhat formally in white party dress or in white, party gown or whatever, and said to have light blonde hair and blue eyes. Others report that she wears a thin shawl, dancing shoes, clutches a purse, and basically she's very quiet. When people drive near Resurrection Cemetery, the young woman asks to be let out, upon where she disappears into the cemetery. According to the Chicago Tribune, which that's like a main, newspaper in Chicago. It's not like
it's not the Inquirer.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. Not like a tabloid. That's what I want to say. It's not a tabloid, paper.
I feel like the Chicago Tribune is pretty well known.
Yeah, it is. It's like the Sun Times. Like those are our two. It's the Chicago Tribune and the Chicago Sun Times are like the big Chicago newspapers. So basically it says that this has happened to a whole bunch. So the legend goes is that the woman named Mary spent the night dancing with her boyfriend at the O. Henry Ballroom, which I believe actually is still active. It's in Willow Springs.
It's still there.
It is. In 2016, it actually had a fire, so it was gutted. But supposedly that ballroom is still there. So it's still active and all of that. When she left the ballroom, she started walking up Archer Avenue. She had not gotten very far when she was struck and killed by a hit-and-run driver who fled, leaving the scene, leaving Mary to die. Her parents found her found her, and and obviously she was already passed away. They buried her in Resurrection Cemetery wearing the same beautiful white dancing dress, or white dancing dress and matching dancing shoes. The hit and run driver was never found. So, God, there's so many things that come to this one. So that's one where taxi drivers have seen, or hitchhiker, or people seeing hitchhikers have seen this woman and asking for a ride, and then she disappears. There's one where she will be seen at she'll be seen at the ballroom, and people will dance. Some people say they've even kissed her.
Really?
And yes, there was.
I haven't heard that.
All I know is that, and I can't find the guy's name, but I know that this was actually on Unsolved Mysteries once, and it was a guy who.
All right, I gotta stop you real quick. Unsolved Mysteries scared the ever-living hell out of me as a kid.
Oh yes.
That theme song would start, and as a little kid, I'd be sitting on the couch like, I can watch it, it's fine, and then he'd be like, this week on Unsolved Mysteries, man murders small boys in their home at night. Boys who watch Unsolved Mysteries. That is what he must have meant saying, because every time I watched that show, I was convinced that the guy from Unsolved Mysteries was going to come into my house and murder me that night.
Robert Stack. So,
yes,
if you actually go, I don't know if people know this or not, but like when you know how like you get like a Roku or like TVs or whatever, and they have all these apps now, and they have like these free like download this and you can watch free TV and all of that. So there's a not that we're sponsoring or not that we're plugging anything, but there's a certain app called Pluto.tv. And
I got Pluto. Yeah,
you're on Pluto. There's an actual 24/7 Robert Stack Unsolved Mysteries channel. All it does is it plays Unsolved Mysteries by Robert Stack 24/7.
No, because I don't want to relive that fear as a grown man in my own house going, there's a man coming to kill me now.
So the one from Unsolved Mysteries, I get it. I think there's one really big plot hole that I really don't understand with this one, and that is, so the guy telling the story says that he picked her up and then he started driving her home, and they got in front of Resurrection Cemetery, and as he looked, she vanished, gone. She got out of the car and vanished. He goes, taking that night as a fluke, I went to her house and talked to her mother. Well, first off, how'd you know where she lived?
Did the ghost give him the address?
Yeah, and then he's just like, I don't know about you, but if I'm on a date, okay, or I'm not even going to say this. So I'm happily married, but prior to me being married, okay, if I picked up a woman from a bar or wherever we were at, and we were going to go hang out somewhere else, or driving her home, or anything like that, okay, I don't think I've ever been that inebriated, so don't drink and drive, but I don't think I've ever been that inebriated that if somebody was in my car, I knew this person was in my car, and then got out of the car and disappeared, I don't think my first reaction would be, I want to find out where this woman went, and I'm going to go to her house in the morning. You know what I'm saying? Like,
I know, I get what you're saying, but if I was in, say I'm driving her home and I'm sober and I was at the bar, don't drink and drive. Let's make that clear. No drinking and driving.
Yeah.
But if I'm driving home from the bar and she's sitting next to me and I look over and she's like, oh, hey, drop me off here, and it's a cemetery, and I'm like, listen, lady, I don't think you want to stop at the cemetery, and then she's gone. But she did have the foresight to tell me her parents' home address. I may go in the morning because that's freaky.
But we digress.
Yeah.
So supposedly the end part of the story is that he goes over, finds the house, opens up the door. Mother answers the door and says, who are you? And she goes, well, I'm looking for your daughter, Mary. And she says, that's impossible. You can't. And she says, he goes, well, why not? He says, I guess supposedly he sees a picture behind her. He says, that's her. He goes, she's been dead for however many years. That's impossible. And it's Mary Bergovi. That's the name that pops up, as Mary Bergovi. So like I said, I see kind of plot holes in that, but sometimes I understand that, sometimes those shows have to like cut out for time. So it's just, you gotta kind of take it with, a grain of salt type sort of thing. I think the thing that scares me the most that nobody talks about with this one, okay, is that Jerry Paulus, a Chicago South Sider, reported that in 1939, he met a person who he thought became Resurrection Mary at the Liberty Grove and Hall at 47th and Mozart. It was not the O. Henry Ballroom. So this is kind of like interesting that it's not that. They danced. This is one of the person that says that they even kissed. And it says they asked her to drive along Archer Avenue, exiting a car and disappearing in front of Resurrection Cemetery. So like, I want to know where that one is. Okay. Where that one really kind of came. The other one is that in 1973, Resurrection Mary was said to have shown up at the Harlow's nightclub on Cicero Avenue on Chicago's southwest side. Once again. So same year, a cab driver came to Chet's Melody Lounge across the street from Resurrection Cemetery. So it's like this ghost seems to travel around, which is interesting to me. That's why I'm kind of bringing up these different dates. So they're saying that there's dates that go from 1976, 1978, 1980, 1989, where people said that they've actually hit her with their car. So we have her dancing in ballrooms, hitchhiking, people. She's running out, disappearing as people are being, striking her with the car. And I think this is the one that throws me for a loop, because this, once again, this is kind of like, like you kind of get into the science. I know we're not scientists at all, but where it's kind of the, not even close. So, no. But this one's actually physical. You can see physical with this one. Is that supposedly she burned her handprints into the wrought iron fence at the cemetery in August of 1976. Although officials at the cemetery say that a truck had damaged the fence, there's no evidence of a ghost, but there's definitely burn marks on this gate. And some people say that...
you sent me those pictures, and it doesn't look like a truck hit it. It literally looks like somebody was holding it with both hands and burned the holy hell out of this gate.
Now, I think you work... Didn't you say you work with metals or something like that, or something to a point?
Kind of. I used to work with some metal stuff. Not so much anymore, but...
All I know is wrought iron is heavy, and it can take a lot of heat.
Yeah.
Which to me, if a ghost, supposedly these people that touch her, she's cold as ice, which supposedly is the, touch of a corpse. So my thing that I'm looking at is, why is this like now suddenly hot? Like, I would love to look at, like, if this is true, I want to know more about this story. Like, why did this one become a story of her burning her hands? Did somebody see it? Like, where did that come from? And I haven't been able to find anything more on that.
I have heard sometimes that people have been driving past, and apparently Mary is a really nice ghost, but then every now and again she meets a man who is not as nice, apparently. And when she meets a scumbag, you can see her like standing outside of the gate, holding it and shaking it and screaming. And people have also stopped because they see this woman wearing white, holding the fence and just shaking it and her screaming.
And
I
haven't seen anything.
But this goes back to that whole thing of it being, like just word of mouth. Like, I know Resurrection Mary, and all the stories you've said I've heard, but there's one that always stood out to me, and my friend told me this one. And we were doing all the ghost hunting things. And they told me this story of Resurrection Mary, and he said it's the only story that actually kind of gave him the chills about it. Was apparently Mary only makes herself known to men. She doesn't expose herself to women, or women can't see her. Only men can see her, and she only ever gets picked up by men. It's never a woman who picks her up. And apparently there were two girls out ghost hunting. They lived in the southwest suburbs of Chicago, so they decided to go past Resurrection Cemetery, and they drove up and down, back and forth, trying to see Mary. And after about an hour, they said, all right, we're not seeing Mary. So the one girl said, I'm going to go to my boyfriend's. And the girl that she was with said, just drop me off at home. So she dropped her off at home and then went to get her to her boyfriend's house. And she pulled out front and she saw him look out the window like, I don't know anybody from Chicago, but we're typically window lookers. We like just look out the window when we see headlights in our front yard. And I don't know. It's like it's like one of the few places I've ever been where like everybody's like, oh yeah, no, you see headlights, you just kind of like open up the drape and look out the window to see who's there. And her boyfriend looked out the window and was like staring at her. And she was like kind of getting upset about it because she's like, he was just staring at her while she's in the car. So she gets out and goes up to the front door and he opens it and he's like, I thought you were coming alone. And she's like, what do you mean? And he looks at it, he's like, well, where's, so-and-so? And she's like, I dropped her off. And he's like, then who the hell was in your back seat when you pulled up?
Oh.
Apparently, yeah, Mary had followed them and gone with them and was in the car with them. And when her boyfriend looked out the window, he saw Mary sitting in the back seat staring at him. He thought her friend came with her, and she did it. And that's when the girl like freaked out, and the boyfriend was like, it was this girl with blonde hair wearing a white dress. Like he like perfectly described Mary just sitting in the back seat with her.
So do they say that she will appear but she appears to like all men, not just certain men?
No, just any man who's driving along, or any man who's, I guess, I don't know. I personally think that all of these Mary myths, there's a part of me that likes that there's a skeptic in me and then there's a believer in me. And I like to think that Mary is just this really powerful ghost who truly wants to see the good in people. And she exposes herself to try to show like good people. But every now and again, she kind of exposes herself to bad people to say, there's other things in this world you will never understand.
So now I don't know if you found anything else. The last sighting I have per se of Mary has been in 1989. Have you seen anything? I have not found anything else after 1989.
Everything I've heard, it was like urban legend, like Mary myths and, things that Mary had done. And every now and again, we'd hear about some guy who pulled over and picked her up. And it's always some high school kid when we were in high school, which I think shows the relatability of the stories through age.
Interesting. Oh, I do have a little bit more information too. So the Willowbrook Ballroom, also known as the O. Henry Ballroom, supposedly that fire did destroy it.
Oh, it did.
Yeah. So I guess it is no longer open. And this is from this article I looked up is from 2017. So I guess they couldn't restore it after the fire. That's interesting. So now the question I have with that is, once again, we're not scientists to this. So, we're just kind of, and anybody who's listening to us right now, please, wherever you're listening to us on, find where you can post and write us comments, because we'd love to talk about them on the next shows. But
yeah, we have a Discord. Hit us up on our Discord. We'd love to hear about it too.
Absolutely. So my thing that I'm looking at is, if you destroy per se the house or the home where the hauntings per se occurring, does that anger the spirit? Does that anger the ghost?
You think like all the stuff you hear is that like these ghosts get super angered by having their things destroyed or their area destroyed. Or I mean, in other ways, like maybe that ballroom was holding her to earth, and when it burned down, it kind of released her.
Could be. I mean, I just, My thing, I don't know if this sounds weird, and then we can get into the ones that you brought, Mark. This is my final thought with it.
No.
This one has always intrigued me, and I would always love to have it happen. And if I could get past like wetting my pants and knowing that like she per se was the ghost. So now that's the other thing too. Once again, not scientists. Let's say we are in the middle of a haunting. Are we going to know? Like now that I know about this legend per se. Let's say I'm driving and I see this and I'm like, and I see this woman. Am I going to be like, that could be Resurrection Mary? Hey, that could be her. Maybe, like knowing, is that maybe why we wouldn't see it? People not knowing is when she would appear. So like you're in this like state of, well, I know she's not going to see me or you know what I'm saying? So with that, let's say that did happen. Would I actually be able to like stop, pick her up and be like, I know you're a ghost? Like what would happen?
I don't. Maybe she would. Maybe she wouldn't. I don't know. Like, it could be people who are just down their luck. It could be guys who are just looking for something. If she is out there and she is exposing herself to people, trying to get them to pick up, like, what is her motive behind it too? Like, why? All the stories just end with her leaving the cemetery or like leaving and running out. And it just leaves the guy wondering what the hell just happened. It's not like you ever get these moral of the stories where it's like, she told me about, my grandmother and that she's okay. Or, my grandfather, left us and did this instead. It's not like she gives them some prophetic vision. It's just literally, hey, that's my house. Wait, stop. Boom, I'm out. And then you never see her again.
Yeah. Like what can I would be like, what can I do to help make you settle? Like what
exactly?
What's I don't know. I don't know if that sounds weird or not, but I like. So
no, I get exactly what you're saying, and I think that's something that nobody asks in these ghost stories: is if you actually hear it and believe it, does it happen?
Yeah. So those are my two.
Okay. So now we are going up 94 and going to the northern suburbs. The northern suburbs, ironically enough, the stories that I have are very similar to yours. And however, they're just different parts of Chicago. And the first one is White Cemetery on Cuba Road in Lake Zurich in Barrington, Illinois. I've known about White Cemetery since I lived there and Cuba Road since I've been there. In a lot of ways, White Cemetery is very similar to Bachelor's Grove. According to, Michael Keeling's Quick and Dirty Guide to Cuba Road, White Cemetery has been there since like 1820.
Okay.
It's a super old cemetery. Yep. And Barrington is a pretty affluent area of the northern suburbs of Illinois. And when White Cemetery was built, I mean, it was just farmers. There weren't mansions. There was nothing. It was just farmers who were up there from, the settler days and all of that. Because of that, White Cemetery had been there for so long, it just kind of became this like forgotten area. There were a lot of headstones every now and again, someone to be buried there, but it wasn't anything crazy. Every now and again, though, people would report seeing, and this kind of comes from Patch, just like you found some stuff about Resurrection Mary on there, is that people would claim that they saw like a woman walking up and down the road carrying a lantern.
Okay.
Just this little old woman, and sometimes they'd see like a stagecoach, and that it was just this woman carrying a lantern, and they'd sometimes see her in a stagecoach, and that was it. Like that was like the spirit, and it was this spirit of Cuba Road right by White Cemetery, right between like Rainbow Road and White Cemetery. I guess that was the big thing. It wasn't until about the 60s that, people started seeing a lot more ghosts and a lot more sightings of things. That also, it gets pointed out that White Cemetery was kind of like a popular hangout for like high school kids. They'd go drink beers, smoke cigarettes, just kind of hang out there because it was dark, it was secluded. It was a cemetery, so like not a lot of people were going out there, and it's right off the road, surprisingly. But I mean, back then this road was nothing.
So it was funny. I'll tell you, with you bringing up that, we had the one, once again, we were, when I was kids, we were like, hey, we're going to go hang out at Bachelor's Grove. And then we found out, well, maybe we really shouldn't do that. So my one buddy was like, well, let's go up to White Cemetery. And then we're like, and now this is, prior to like cell phone days, like a point, like that wonderful beeper phase. And then we're like, well, how long is it going to take to get up there? And we're like, oh, it's going to be like an hour and 15 minutes. Yeah, we're not going to drive up there.
Yeah, I know. And it's not as impressive as Bachelor's Grove either. It's literally right on Cuba Road. You can drive past it, and it's probably like half an acre of land, maybe an acre of land. Not even that. I would probably say like half an acre of land, and it's just like
it's really small.
It's tiny, and you would just drive past it, and you're like, oh, that was it. Like there were times like when we first started like to look for it, we drove past it like 3 times, and then we're like, that was it.
Yep,
that was that gate that we saw. That was it.
That's kind of how I feel about Bachelor's Grove. Like people would walk in and be like, "That's it." I mean, this is really it. Like,
yeah, you expect like demons to be hanging out in the trees and like ghosts to be standing there, like pointing at you as you walk in, and you just imagine like skeletons resting upon tombstones. Nope, it's not. It's just a little old cemetery. But anyway, so in the 60s is when this kind of happened. And this ties into something. And I'll tell this story first, then I'm going to kind of reverse it. But in the 60s, the White Cemetery was vandalized. Apparently somebody like broke in and, spray painted a bunch of swastikas on the tombstones. And it kind of forced the towns to go, okay, we need to make sure that people can't do this anymore. People shouldn't be desiccating the graves like this, especially with swastikas, because nobody likes swastikas.
Yeah, I mean, that's just a swastika is a sign of hate,
Well, not always, depending on your religion, but
yeah.
I want to make that too. In your religion, swastika may not be a sign of hate, but when they're spray painted the way they were, it obviously was.
Yeah, and that's what I mean. I don't mean to offend anybody, but that's what I'm saying. The way that this was used was as a sign of hate.
Yes, exactly. And that's when the town kind of stepped it up. But also, surprisingly, that's when a lot more of these hauntings started happening. People had always like claimed Cuba Road had a lot of eerie incidents. Like you said, there was all the gangsters used to come out there off of Cuba and Rainbow Road. Used to go out there and, vacation out there. And there was a lot of rumors that they also like brought people out there and killed them. And just buried them out in the woods. Yeah, so there's similar aspects to it. And that's when people started seeing like a cigar chewing mobster. They'd look up in their rearview mirror while they're driving on Cuba Road between Rainbow Road and White Cemetery. And they'd see like this mobster sitting in their back seat with a cigar in his mouth, staring at you, smiling. And then they'd turn their heads and look, and there'd be no one in the back seat. Every now and again, a phantom car would chase you down the road, and like right around Rainbow Road, and it would chase you down the road, and right when you got right by White Cemetery, it would pull off into the cemetery and then just disappear. Or sometimes you would drive past, and the phantom car would be sitting in the driveway to White Cemetery, just waiting, And people say they see orbs, and the orbs thing has always been hard for me to swallow. Like, is it dust? Is it reflection? Is it anything? I don't think orbs are a really good sign of it being a ghost. Whenever I see orbs in videos, I'm like, there's like 1,000 things that could explain the orb. People claim that they see orbs, fly out from the cemetery, drive over the road, fly back into the cemetery, and then disappear. Then the
there's a something with that, and there was and we can get into it. There's like an orb that floats like off of like a railroad track. I forgot where it's at. I think it's Virginia or something like that. And they're saying that this can actually happen because of certain like pressures like below ground that actually shoot up an electric static.
Oh, see, that makes sense.
Like bolt. It makes it actually look like there's a light floating.
But with the floating orb and the static electricity thing makes sense. And if anybody wondering if it sounds like there's a weird jump, we had a little bit of a technical difficulty there. So our amazing sound editor, Tristan, cut it out, probably fixed it all up. But there might be a strange jump. But with the orb, it makes complete and total sense that it would be state electricity, and that could be a reasonable and logical expression and an answer for it.
Yeah, like I said, I'm trying to look up what this light is, that kind of that kind of describes it, and I just can't think of it. I like I said, I think it's in Virginia, and they talked about it, but they have never been able to actually make it happen, which is once again those weird things. It's like,
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
you say that this is a scientific thing. Okay, well then there should be a way of being able to try to produce it.
You should be able to replicate it if it's a scientific thing. I mean, that's the whole thing of the scientific method. Without you develop a hypothesis, then you have to prove the hypothesis. If you can't replicate it, like,
Yeah, whereas to me that there's really no proof to it then.
no.
But once again,
And I think it's strange that too is in the 60s when all these high school kids start hanging out. That's when there was an urban legend of like a hooked man that you'd see. Like there was the myth of the woman,
Yeah.
but then all of a sudden there was the hooked man. And the hook man, you would see him walking down the road and he would be trying to get people to stop to let him in the car. And it's always some insidious reason that he wants you to stop. And it's never just he wants to tell you not to go down the road because there's a rock in the road. It's always he's going to murder you and kill you.
yeah, and I think that that's one of the things that I find very interesting about Chicago ghost stories is that, so I'll take back to Resurrection Mary or Bachelor's Grove. Okay, so yeah, so there's the quote unquote ghosts or apparitions that are happening, but then there's always like this violent, it has something to do with the mob, or you know what I'm saying? Like it always goes back to, yes, I mean that's a huge part of Chicago history, but it's like, okay, where does the actual legend or apparitions happen to where does like present time legend that starts to change the story of these places start to kick in?
Yeah. I mean, it like I said, it kind of goes back to the whole thing of, I don't feel like ghost stories ever have a good origin story. And by good, I mean, it's never like, he died saving a bunch of kids and now you can see him, standing on the corner waiting for all the children to make sure they get home safe. No, it's always like he has a hook for a hand, or it's a scary mobster, and he goes there because he was murdered terribly and tortured, and he's gonna kill you when he sees you, and unless you do like 5 things. It's like the whole Candyman thing, like
Yeah,
it's never a good origin story.
No, it never is.
Which I guess goes back to then off of Rainbow Road and Cuba Road, there's always the old insane asylum that we always used to have and talk about there too. And people used to say they'd see lights on in the windows, and the place had been abandoned for like 70 years. And you see lights on in the windows. You hear people screaming and moaning from like the torture and stuff. And I there's always been speculation, even if that was an insane asylum. They say it was just like a factory or like a unit. And there was stuff in the basement that didn't make sense there, but
so where you bring up that point, where does actual per se the placebo effect kick in?
Yeah.
Like, oh, this is an insane asylum. Well, that means that I must have, we must hear things that happen, and suddenly I see lights and all of that. You know what I'm saying? It's kind of like, okay, are you sure? Like your mind is not playing tricks on you? Like you're hearing or seeing what you want to see?
Exactly. And I think that comes back to a lot of the ghost stuff too, is that like with this place in particular, like I remember going out there and everybody I knew had gone out there and everybody I knew had been like, oh, we went to the insane asylum. Like I said, everybody always found weird stuff in the basement. It was always like, oh, we went out there and we found this or this and this. And even if it was a factory, it doesn't explain for why there was this stuff in the basement. And everybody always had different examples of what was in the basement. And that too is another thing, like the basement. It's always the basement. It's never the, kitchen. It's always the basement. Whenever we go out to Cuba Road, like personally, I never saw anything really on Cuba Road. Never did. I had a couple times, but I think I was more playing into the story of what other people were seeing. It was never something I could honestly say that I saw this and that it truly was there and it was unexplainable and I don't know what it was, or I saw somebody, I swear to everything I believe in that I saw this thing. And I never had that experience, but everybody I know did.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat as you, and I think that um see, like, I'll say a little bit of my past. So I'm very close to one of my cousins, and he actually loves horror movies, love gore movies, all of that. So he kind of like introduced me at a young age to these things. So it's like, I don't want to say that I don't get scared, because I think that's impossible. I think everybody gets scared. I think it's an emotion and something that everybody possesses. It's just, there's just certain things that will trigger differently than other things trigger. So like, I think that, like, when people say, oh, well, let's go out to this place or whatever like that, it's like, okay, that's great, but like, it's not really going to scare me. Like, there's not, like, I don't get scared like that. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, and I'll admit I get scared like that, but I think it's more so from the hype. Like I'm out in the woods, it's dark,
Yeah.
it's creepy.
Yeah.
There's creepy stuff. Like at one point, people were murdered or killed there or something happened at these locations and it's creepy when you go out there and you kind of pump yourself up for that creep factor. And I think if you go into that situation, I know we have one more place to talk about too, but that's just more of just a kind of thing. I think what we're talking about here, though, really gets to the roots of these like haunted areas like Bachelor's Grove, Resurrection Mary, White Cemetery, Cuba, and Rainbow Road. Is that if you go out there with the clear, like, I'm gonna see this and it's gonna be there, and I'm gonna be able to tell everybody I know that's seen these things that I saw a ghost, I think you're gonna see a ghost. Granted, if it's really a ghost or if it's something that you're so deeply wanting to see, I don't know at that point then. I'm not going to discredit you and call you a crazy psycho because you say you saw a ghost, you know?
Yeah. I get exactly what you're saying. And I totally agree on that part. So
Yeah, it's a strange thing, and I think it goes back to that whole human aspect of it that we want there to be an afterlife. And I think it's more of an ego thing. And I think it's more of a, you know, if you're an atheist or whatever, like I understand that viewpoint as well. But I mean, I think most people, regardless of what they want to believe, nobody wants to die. Nobody wants this to be the end.
no, I think I think that, getting into that whole aspect of that thought of, okay, so when we die, do we float around, and do just certain people, are they able to make themselves known? Is there, per se, a heaven or a hell, or whatever they feel an afterlife is, or what you believe an afterlife is? I just use heaven and hell because that's what I've grown up with.
Yeah.
But I look at that and it's like, okay, well, if that's true, is it, the thought of, are they unrestless? Like we always hear, are they unrestless spirits? And they need to find their home. They need to find where they belong, type sort of thing. I find it, I think the thing that kind of gets in there, and I think you're touching upon two different things. And I think one is we're trying to look at the science of it, but on the other end, then we're looking at the legend of it, and we're looking at a spiritual side of things. Yeah. So when we look at the science of it, we need to be able to say, this is what's happening, this is why it's happening, so this is what's going to happen. And then as we start to continue this is what the result should be. That's a scientific way of looking at it. On the spiritual side of that, it's like you look at it and say, well, why? Where do we go? We really can't prove it. And I think that this is what makes such a good ghost story or a haunted place great, is because there's always some science to it, i.e. could be the lights, because the electricity and whatever the things are happening in the ground, and that's what produces the static electricity to come up and you can see the light. Or the spiritual side of it of, here, somebody's actually walking. I kissed this person. I held this person's hand and they disappeared.
Yeah.
Like, to me, I think that that's what makes such a good ghost story.
Ah, it does. Like it's always better when somebody actually touches the ghost. When somebody, like you said,
Yes.
kisses the ghost. Because if you just see something creepy, anybody can see something creepy. But when you get someone who's like, they hugged me, they kissed me, we danced all night. It was the most magical night of my life, and then she was a ghost. And it's like, oh man, that sucks for you.
And then it's like, and even to the point, and this is just going to be a joke, but think about it. Like if you're looking and saying, oh, I'm at home and whatever, and it's like, God, I really wish I could really meet somebody, and then you actually meet somebody, and then they're a ghost, and you're like, really? That's all I can get is a ghost.
Oh man, it's like Tinder for ghosts.
Yeah, yeah, but no, I just, the other thing though too is that, when I look at ghost stories is, it's like normal conversation. It always seems that like it's a one-sided conversation.
Yeah.
Like if you ever watch like ghost stories, okay, it's always the one person asking questions. It's never really a ghost answering questions.
No.
Like there's times, I'm not saying that doesn't happen, but like there's never like, to me, like there's never like a defining answering of a question. To me, it always seems like it's always open-ended when they have these ghost stories.
Yeah, no, it's never like the ghosts, like with the Ouija board or like, with the messages the ghost writes on the mirrors. It's never like, I need you to break open the wall and get the baby rattle. That's why I'm still here. Let me go home. It's always like death, red rum, murder.
Yeah, exactly. The 9 will die at midnight on the red moon to the north of the east of the south building. It's like,
yeah,
So, no, I mean, but once again, I think that that's what makes a good ghost story, and why those types of stories are always told more often. Going and saying, okay, so you have this woman who is walking with a lantern. Why is she walking with a lantern? Why is this happening? You have, Resurrection Mary, who is dancing and touching, other people, and all that. Once again, it's like these stories become legends, and these legends become so repeatable and relatable, and it just makes it so good. And that's why, we answer and we keep telling these stories.
Yeah, and nobody wants to, like I said, I think it goes back to the previous episode where we talked about ghosts, and nobody wants a good ghost story. Everybody wants the scary, cautionary ghost story of like, if you go in this house where this family was murdered, you can still hear them screaming, or you can still hear the murderer walking around the house chasing after you. It's never like, hey, Casper, what's up? Like, what adventure are we going on today? Oh, we're going to find the candy in the walls. It's never that. It's always like the knife coming through the wall and, here's Johnny.
Yeah. So, Mark, what's this last place that you got to talk to us about?
The last place is what I talked about last week, in the house with no corners.
Mm-hmm.
The house with no corners is actually the Stickney Mansion, and it's in Bull Valley, Illinois. Way north. Like it's about as north as you can go pretty much before you're in Wisconsin. And the Stickney Mansion is a crazy one because it's a legit place. It's also the police station for Bull Valley, which is also incredibly crazy because it's not just some abandoned house on the side of the road. It's the police station. And it's been the police station since I think the 80s is when it was converted. And the Stickney Mansion is crazy because, like I said, it's a house built with no corners. It was built by George Stickney. He was an incredibly wealthy man back in the day. And I don't know what he did, to be honest with you. Everything I found has nothing to do with what he did. But he built this massive 2-story mansion. And when I say massive, like in today's terms, it's not that big, but back in those days, it was
back in
huge.
The 1800s. It was, yeah.
Yeah. And the entire first floor is like their living area. And then the second floor is just a giant ballroom.
Yep.
Well, two ballrooms. One that they had like their major ballrooms, and then like Mrs. Stickney had her own little ballroom.
Mm-hmm.
And they built the house out there because they were very into spiritualism and they held seances. Like people from Chicago would take the hour and a half long drive to get to Bull Valley to do seances with them.
Mm-hmm. Now, I think you're going to get to this, but when you say it's the house with no corners, you're going to get to the reasoning behind that.
Yes, and
okay.
The reason why they built this without corners is that Mr. Stickney believed that demons and ghosts could be trapped in corners.
Yep.
So if there's no corners in the house, the ghost could freely move within and leave the house. And that way, the seance could be done safely and, non-prisoning, I guess, is a term that I just made up because I don't think that's correct. But we're going to go with it. As I said, I'm not a great speller. So this is where it gets crazy, is because when I was a kid and when I was like in my teenage years, everyone always says, and this is the legend everybody always said, is that Mr. Stickney was found dead in the only corner that was built into the house.
Yep.
With a horrified look on his face.
So not necessarily Stickney, but do you understand? So once again, I'm going to go back and I'll say a little bit of my personal self. So I am a Christian Catholic. So this is kind of where this thought process comes from. One of the reasons why corners weren't in there too, or why they feel that demons or evil spirits can be in corners, is so Jesus Christ supposedly died at 3 p.m. on Friday.
Yeah.
Okay. On a Friday. Okay. Good Friday. So 3 p.m. is per se by legend or by story is when death lost his grip on people. And then that, when he raised himself from the dead 3 days later. Okay. So remember 3 days later, death had no bearing on people. So your soul doesn't die anymore. Your soul actually continues on. So 3 o'clock at night, or 3 a.m., supposedly is the witching hour per se, or the devil's hour per se.
Yeah.
Because it's at night. Now, if you take that, what is the square root of 9?
3.
Which is 3. What is a perfect corner? 90 degrees.
Yeah, 90 degrees. Yeah.
So that's where some of the 3 comes into. That's something I heard a long time ago.
You know what? It makes sense and it checks out in my head.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it makes complete sense. And if we're going from that story of the ghost in the corners, that's a completely logical way to explain something as crazy as that is.
Mm-hmm.
In my own personal, I don't think it's, if you want to believe that, that's fine. And I'm not going to call you crazy for it. But just in my own head, I'm like, it's kind of crazy that you just like all of a sudden, like I look at every corner of my room right now and there's like 500 ghosts just stuck there going, can you just, let us out?
Yeah, let us out, please.
Yeah.
But I will say this, and just for anybody listening, and I don't know if you've covered this in your last episode with this, and this is me my first. When I talk about me being Christian or Catholic or whatever, remember that's just my belief.
Oh,
so yeah. So I mean, I'm not trying to force that onto anybody else. So I don't want that to say, people look at it and say, well, this guy on this podcast said this or whatever. So we're not trying to say that to people of like, you have to believe this. Your own beliefs are special and important and very unique and very, once again, just, I use the word special because I really feel that that's what people hold in their heart and that's what they believe. And there's nobody that can turn to you and say, your beliefs are wrong. So people can look at me and be like, Dan, you're completely full of shit. That's just fun math or whatever like that you just came up with. And that's fine. I would look at you and say, perfect. That's awesome. I love that that's your opinion. And I accept your opinion on that. So I just wanted to kind of get that out there. I didn't want to be pushing my religion out to people.
No. And I think that's a big part of our show, just to keep talking about this real quick, because I think it's good that we clarify that, is that we are people, we have our own beliefs. Like my beliefs is different than Dan's. It doesn't mean that Dan's wrong or I'm right, or I'm right and he's wrong, or that I'm wrong and he's right. It doesn't mean any of that. I think it's a very important thing about being human, that we share our own experiences and how it's shaped our opinion of the world. And I think it's good that we discuss that without a judgmental mind state, and as long as we keep an open discourse and don't use this as a personal attack or a personal reason. I think it's great that we talk about this stuff. Getting back to the house on the corners now, though. that was our the more you know touching moment conversation of the night. But so back to the corners. So apparently, yeah, Mr. Stickney was found dead in the one corner in the house with like a horrified look on his face. And a lot of people say that they had these seances because that they had 10 children and only 3 of them survived.
Mm-hmm.
So they lost 7 children. Then there's always, I heard rumors that, Mr. and Mrs. Stickney were, sacrificing their children and just crazy stuff. Because, I mean, you go out to this house, it's in the middle of nowhere. Even now, like even today, it's in the middle of nowhere. And back in the day when there wasn't even, I mean, this was the only house, like probably for miles. Like it was just farmland and that was really it. Like, this was the only place for miles, and it's a huge house for that time period. So when we delve a little bit into this story, it's important to remember that this is the police station for the town, and it's been the police station since 1985. Nobody knows what caused Mr. Stickney's death, which I think is creepy on its own. Like, the guy died. There's no death certificate from what I could find. His death is a mystery.
And you know what happens when a rich person dies?
Everybody knows about it.
There's always controversy. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, no. Because, I was just going to say there's always something. Like, there's always a reason what happened.
Yes, absolutely.
And I think it's creepy that there is no death certificate for him. Like, oh, there might be. It's just that they may not have released it. Like, and to me, that's even creepier, though. Like, why wouldn't they release it? That's creepy thing number 1. Creepy thing number 2 about this is that 2 cops have quit because of the paranormal stuff they experience in this place.
I mean, if you can't handle it.
Yeah, like they have flat out quit and they were like, I won't stay alone in that place at night. Like they turned in their badge and said, I quit. I can't do it anymore here.
Did they give a reason of what these officers actually saw?
No, nothing. They stopped. They just said, I won't talk about it.
See, that's so weird to me. That people get that scared over that.
Yeah. Well, here's creepy thing number 3 is that WGN TV News actually did a story about it in 2005. And they interviewed the chief of police at the time. And he actually went on about his paranormal events inside the house. He said that the village employees, because I guess it is the police station, it's also like the village building, that village employees have heard numerous sounds that seem to defy explanation. And this is on AlanShowalter.com. It's like a big history of the building, and it's also, I believe, on the Wikipedia. So, I mean, this stuff is pretty well documented. But he says, that they heard, they can't hear, there's sounds that they can't explain, that they described hearing footsteps on the second floor in the ballroom, which is where all the seances were held. And that day, the room was just used for storage for village records. So there's really nothing up there. They hear people like walking around up there and just constantly moving. And these footsteps actually extend out and into the stairwell. So it seems like people are walking from upstairs downstairs.
So question with that.
Okay.
Question with that. Once again, I'm going to put ourselves into this. Okay. If you heard this, would you have the know-how or fortitude to say, let's say you're at your desk or whatever, and you hear them walking or whatever, and a door opens or whatever, you know where they're at. And you say, can you please make sure the door is closed and the lights turned off? Talk normal to the ghost, like you're having a conversation, and see, like, you know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah,
I remember watching something about that. Like, it was a woman in a house, and something was float, or it was a hotel or something like that, and they picked up like a magazine or something. She goes, can you please put that down? And they put it back down and like walked out of the room. Like, she felt like the presence wasn't there anymore. I just, once again, I think it just goes back to that whole thought of, would you, if you know that there's a ghost or you feel that there's a ghost and you believe it, are you actually going to see it? Or are you actually going to see something?
In these situations, that I know that the people who work here all have these like experiences, and like, here, let me get through the laundry list of the stuff that people have said have happened, and then
okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. Let's touch upon this though, because I think it's an important point. Is that People have included, like, kind of touching more so on this, is that they've included hearing human like voices and sounds like in the room that they're in, and even sometimes like things that are physical, like sometimes hearing the toilets flush for no reason. And then the chief himself actually said he had objects on his desk move, lights turning on and off, and doorknobs turning and doors opening on their own, and then just hearing voices in the thin air of the house itself. And then one time he heard even somebody just scream in his ear. And the creepiest experience I think he had is when he came face to face with Stickney's father-in-law.
Okay.
So to answer your question, like, I think when you start here, you would know the stories and it'd be creeped out when you're in there. And I think if I was working as a police officer in the police station of a very supposedly haunted building where a lot of serious shit went down, I think at first I would be apprehensive about, I think I'd be freaked out. I'd be like, okay, I don't know if I want to be in this building too often. Then after a while, I think I'd get comfortable. And I think once I got comfortable, if all this stuff still kept happening, or it got worse the more comfortable I got, like all of a sudden I'm sitting there, all of a sudden I look up and the door just opens, or I hear somebody scream in my ear and I turn around and no one's there, or if I literally come face to face with some dude's father-in-law, at that point, I don't know what I would do. Like, I think it's a little more than me trying to be scared, and I think at that point, something's actually happening. And it could be in my mind, but it could also be that this is real.
And I think, once again, I think you hit on that too. It's like, here we are behind microphones, looking at computers, talking to each other. But, if the, per se, tire meets the road type sort of thing, a rubber meets the pavement, it'd be like, hi, my name is Dan, and I'm looking for a clean pair of shorts. It's like, it's like, I mean, like, I can't tell you what I actually would do. In my mind, I know what I would like to do. Once again, it's kind of like, would you actually be able to? Would you be in the right frame of mind to be like, let me get this straight right now? And like, it sounds so easy on paper, but like, let's sit down. So, Mark, you and I are sitting in a room and we say, here's a ghost. Now, for all intents and purposes of what I believe now has completely gone out the window. You realize that?
Yeah.
Like, me being Catholic and Christian, I see a ghost sitting in front of me that is completely out the window of every single belief that I have. But that would be a shell shock just to my head of now everything I've grown up with is gone. Now, would I possess the mental capability to sit down at that moment and be like, now, tell me who you are. Tell me about your life story. Why do you haunt this place? And be in that right frame of mind. I don't know if I could do it. I don't know if mentally I could comprehend that.
I think if you're in the position where you can ask those questions and that if you're in the position where you're like in a house or in a building and you have the ability to no longer just be frightened, but to sit down and have an actual sit down conversation with the ghost, I think all pre-existing belief may have gone out the window at that point, because now you're face to face with something, and that face to face may change belief, but at the other time too, I mean, it could be an expansion where, being a Christian Catholic, it could also be just, this is another form of purgatory.
Correct.
And that this
correct. It could be. I mean, it could be the exact, like, could be purgatory, not necessarily a different form, but this could be purgatory.
Yeah. And I think if we want to think of it from that point, that if this is purgatory, I mean, you'd be more solidifying your belief at that point, because I mean, you're trying to help this soul hopefully move on and experience whatever hopeful redemption or acceptance of sin that they committed that's keeping them there, to maybe move on to the great gig in the sky.
So I didn't catch this the first time I read what you sent over, but this last part on this page, and it says, George was a secret disbeliever in spiritualism who intentionally put in a corner to demonstrate to the more dedicated wife that he could flaunt the spirits with impunity.
Yeah, I know.
I find that amazing.
Yep, and that's why people say he died in the corners, because he was like, it's not real, and then one night it was real.
Once again, though, is that true? Is that a true statement, or is that just a passed down story?
Well, it goes so crazy with this place, because I've heard like all this rumors and all this stuff, and the police, have done this, but then there's no thing that tells you how George died, And on top of that, when you look at everything that's going on, people say it's either like it's just a police station now. There's people who have honestly said that no, it's not a police station. It's actually a federally funded, like, governmental location, because this guy opened up a door to like some other hell dimension or something, and that's what's in there now. It's not a police station. It's like a federal, like the FBI, like crazy, like black op soldier thing is in there protecting this gateway so nobody can open it again, or nobody can like try to open it again, because apparently they got it closed, and it's now closed, but it's always there now. So they're there to protect it so nobody opens it again. And I'm like, oh my God, this is going crazy at this point. Like, where do we go with that?
Yeah, it's so much fun. God, I love talking about ghost stories.
I do too. And I think for wrapping up purposes of this episode, because I think we've reached that point to where we've beat this subject yet again to death.
Yep.
I think it's now time for us to kind of give our final thoughts. And since Dan is new to the show, I'll let him go last. So I'll give my final thought now, and then I'll let Dan give yours. But for me, a lot of these haunted places and a lot of these locations are held tight within our local folklore. And local folklore is how we as a culture and we as a society tend to share our history with each other. And sometimes it's cautionary and sometimes it's true. But when we share these stories, it kind of brings the community together, because we always have a Mary, or we always have a scary location, or we always have a Stickney Mansion, but it's always something that unites us as a whole. And scary or not, I think they're good to keep these stories alive, because it forces us to examine our local histories. Like, I can only tell you the scary things about these locations, but I think it's good to know what caused these, especially when we deal with cemeteries, because cemeteries are somewhere where we inter our lost loved ones and inter the dead. And I think it's important that we don't forget them. I think it's also important that we don't disrespect them, but I think it's important that we don't forget them. That's kind of my hot take on this. Dan, what do you feel?
I think I'm going to go back to one. I'm going to piggyback a lot of what you said with that. I think there's certain things in certain areas and certain stories that we pass down from, our families to our friends to bigger groups to cities. I take this as kind of the college or high school mentality. So like, I have a mascot for high school that I am that nickname for that high school. The college that I went to, I am that nickname. I went to St. Xavier University and we are the Cougars. So I know for a fact I'm going to be a Cougar for the rest of my life. Like that's what I hold dear, because that's where I graduated from. And I think that when it comes to these stories, especially in these places, is that it's something that we can be very proud of in our culture or in our where we grew up. And so, yeah, Bachelor's Grove, might not be the greatest place, but you know what? That's part of my history that I grew up with. Resurrection Mary, once again, it's a great story, and it makes for a great story. And I love that when it comes to these stories is that people can always kind of put their twist on it, because nothing is proven. And I think, to wrap up my final thought with that is that the fact that we do that always creates the best type of rivalry towards each other. But when it comes to rivalry, there's also another R word that goes into it, and that's respect. And I think that from ghost stories and being able to pass down ghost stories and legends or whatever like that, and especially for the areas that they are, we learn to respect it, and we learn to respect what they mean to us and how we feel about them. So if we can take that same mentality and start to use that towards people and other people's beliefs and other people's virtues and all of that, I think this world would be a heck of a lot better. Once again, I think that's why good ghost stories are so good, because they can pull people together like that. So I guess that's my final thought with it, especially around Halloween.
And I think that's a good final thought to have. In the end, it is all about respect. I think that's a good place to end it for this episode.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's good that we give a big shout out to Tristan, who is our sound editor. Tristan came to us after the first episode, and he has been a phenomenal asset. He is the unseen member of the Abby Normals. So, Tristan, thank you so much for all your hard, unseen work. We love you and appreciate you. So, for this week, Chicagoland Ghost Stories, that's going to conclude this episode. You can check us out on most podcast streaming platforms, and we should have this uploaded to YouTube as well. Please check out our Discord at The Abby Normals, as well as our Twitter, and follow us. For this week episode, I am Mark.
I am Dan.
This is the Abby Normals podcast, ending transmission.